Hey there, fellow travelers. Welcome to the Tolkien Road, episode 394. In this bonus mailbag episode of Do Not Be Hasty, we'll be considering your thoughts on the foreword and prologue to Lord of the Rings. However, before we begin, I'd like to give a double up air five to our amazing fellowship. Stick 'em up, fellowship. 3, 2, 1. Whoopsht. Outstanding. Special thanks to this episode's executive producers, Kaitlyn of Tea with Tolkien, John R, KG, and EarendilHope. Also, a shout out to those celebrating their fellowship anniversary in September of 2024. Alan C, Stephanie B, Dustin Q, and Robert S. Thank you so much for sticking with us over the years. All right, well, let's dive into the mailbag. All right, so let's look at some of the correspondence with regard to the foreword first. So over on YouTube, some comments left there. First of all, we have the Tolkien Curmudgeon. The Tolkien Curmudgeon says, I wouldn't imagine many Tolkien fans are also fans of King Crimson, but founding member and guitarist Robert Fripp often talks about this idea of the music coming through the musician rather than from him or her. I think this is in reference to, probably me talking about how this, story seems to have kind of been channeled through Tolkien in a lot of ways. I think the best art often has this feeling, and probably the artists feel about it the same way. They're kind of like, I'm not really sure how I did that, right? Like, I can tell you about the process of it, but some of it just came, seemed to have been, inspired somehow from outside of me. But the broader notion of Tolkien fans who are also fans of King Crimson, I wouldn't be surprised to find that there's a big overlap between those two groups. King Crimson, of course, being kind of a classic, one of the early prog rock bands, which, for those who don't know, progressive rock, so these were, like rock bands that tried to do more than just kind of like play, the sort of kind of 2 or 3 minute, kind of catchy radio jingles, right? That these were bands that were trying to do sort of more epic sorts of things, right? Another band from that era, Genesis, Rush. Led Zeppelin had very prog tendencies. They're not really considered a prog band as much, but they had some definite prog tendencies on songs like "Stairway to Heaven." Of course, they often reference Tolkien and Middle Earth and Tolkienian lore in some of their songs. I think there's probably a lot of overlap between those groups. I responded, that I don't doubt it. You might be surprised. A lot of overlap between the prog rock scene and the fantasy fan base. And then Tolkien Curmudgeon responded and said, by the way, Adrian Belew, the other famous guitarist from King Crimson, lives or lived in Nashville. Cool. I did not know that. Of course, Music City, USA. Lots of musicians here. We see some around from time to time. And know folks who know some others. So it's a interesting place to live on that front. Thanks, Tolkien Curmudgeon. All right, next up is Zephyr Optional. Zephyr Optional says, a few times in his writings, Tolkien would suggest people wouldn't be interested in portions of his work. Bahaha, he really didn't know how incomparably awesome he actually was. His humility is missing from our modern world. Yeah, it's true. It's probably weird to him that there's people who are just like lots of people who will just sit there and read his most obscure notes on different things, but here we are, right? You write something that people love as much as they love Lord of the Rings, and that's what happens. So I hope, and for the most part, it's something that made him happy. It made him feel appreciated. I think it did. I find it hard to think that it wouldn't have made him feel appreciated, and I hope he was able to learn how to deal with kind of maybe the crazier level of fan. Who maybe took it a little too far or bothered him a little too much about certain things. But you don't find a lot of that brand of humility in our modern world for sure. So very much agree with that. And then a comment from Inerthil, who said, Tolkien hated allegory, but liked to have applicability in his writings. Yeah, that's exactly the thing, right? Applicability, not allegory. Tolkien Curmudgeon responded and said, yes, and I love the way Tolkien phrased it, saying cordially dislike rather than hate. I love how that makes it sound so polite, something I often fail to be, hence my calling myself the Tolkien Curmudgeon. I think that's, I cordially dislike, right? to me that's like that's a very, I feel like a very like kind of British gentleman way of speaking about something you just totally disdain and hate. I cordially dislike. That is that's a very, makes me chuckle when I think about that, right? Just kind of a cultural thing. And Airthil says, I'm pretty sure he was stronger than that in one of his letters. I imagine he was always cordial in his public statements. Yeah, there's definitely some areas where Tolkien kind of, just cuts loose, isn't so much cordial anymore about how he feels about certain things. But nevertheless, thanks for the comments on the foreword, y'all. Let's move on to the prologue. Right. Ooh, get it open here. I know I can do it. Here we go. All right. So, Anerthil, again, says, were Bagginses, Tooks, and Brandybucks Fallohides? I responded to this comment. This is a great question. I responded that Tooks and Brandybucks, yes. It says, in the text, it says, even in Bilbo's time, the strong Fallohidish strain could still be noted among the greater families, such as the Tooks and the Masters of Buckland. But it says Baggins. I said Baggins, it's not as clear, but Bilbo was a Took on his mother's side, Frodo a Brandybuck on his mother's side. My guess is Bagginses favored the Harfoots based on their propensity for hole dwelling, but that is just a guess. So that would be my thing, is because the Bagginses seem to like to dwell in holes. That's a very Harfoot thing. So I'm guessing it was like Harfoot on the father's sides, and on the mother's sides you had Took in Bilbo's case and Brandybuck in Frodo's case. And then I said, of course, in the time of Bilbo and Frodo, many centuries have elapsed since the settling of the Shires, so all of the hobbits are likely very intermixed between the three groups by this time. That is, again, just my speculation, but I would be surprised if that wasn't the case. All right. And then Anerthil also asks, what do the Smeals look like? By the way, I think Anerthil wins wins the correspondence award for this particular set of episodes, so right on, Anerthil. Good job. I wasn't really sure what Anerthil was asking by this question. What do the Smeals look like? But basically, I think he's just asking what are the great Smeals and that kind of thing. It's the term Tolkien used to describe the living situation in Brandy Halls. I guess they were like the long houses they have in Borneo. I'm not really sure, but on the Tolkien Gateway website, when I look up the Great Smeals, it says they were the ancestral home and many-tunneled mansion of the Took family. It was located in the town of Tookborough in the West Farthing of the Shire. I just think of this as like, something like the Bag End, right? These are just kind of large and nice kind of hobbit hole mansions, I guess you could say, right? Very very livable kind of diggings under hills and that sort of thing. So, in fact, in the Fourth Age, the Great Smeals held one of the largest repositories of historical books and records in the Shire. So they had enough room to store a lot of books and records as well. So, as far as like the details of what they looked like, I think we just kind of have to extrapolate from the descriptions we get of Bag End. So that's how I'd answer that question. All right. And then Anerthil also asks, or said, the Harfoots are browner of skin, not brown-skinned. Their skin was just darker than the other kinds of hobbits. Amazon's logic was browner equals brown equals black of skin. So this is, of course, like a very touchy topic. I don't want to get too far into this and raise anybody's shackles or anything like that. I'm just a humble podcast and YouTuber. But I will note, just thank you for the correction on that, right? What it does say is browner of skin, and it refers to the Fallohides as fairer skinned. So it kind of makes sense, right? It's a comparative thing between the two different peoples or the two different groups of hobbits. I'll just say productive and rational conversation on this front has unfortunately been spoiled by the divisive and politically charged rhetoric of our time. So I don't really care to delve further into this topic, at least not on this episode. But I really do appreciate the correction here. It's important that we get Tolkien's own words, accurately, get them down accurately. So thanks for that, Nerthil. Appreciate it. All right. Let's jump over to Patreon for some comments there. All right. Oop, wrong one. There we go. Okay. Richard BW said, thanks for not being too hasty. Thanks for the not too hasty look at the prologue. By the way, thanks also for your recommendation about the Return of the Shadow. Fun to see how Christopher compared manuscripts regarding how his dad ultimately developed Lord of the Rings. So yeah, all I can say is at your service, Richard. Appreciate your support and being part of our fellowship on Patreon. Highly recommend Return of the Shadow as a source for learning more about Lord of the Rings, especially the early chapters and how they were developed. All right, moving on to the prologue, episode 2. Back over to YouTube and some of our comments over there. So the first comment is from PW Miles 56. PW Miles 56 says, with Thane, I believe Tolkien had in mind the Anglo-Saxon Thanes, which is Thegns, roughly Knights of the Shire. They held their land from the king and were his companions in war. The 12 most important ones made up the Shire Moot, which was a kind of law court, the origin of modern juries. Thane, Thne, is a parallel Scottish title, but more likely a petty lord, like when Macbeth gets to be Thane of Cawdor. I'm pretty sure Tolkien gets details from this from Bishop Stubbs' Constitutional History of England, a copy of which I randomly inherited. He reworked the material pretty freely. The Free Fair might answer to the Folkmoot, another Anglo-Saxon institution. And Pilgrim of Ithilien said the title wasn't strange sounding only because I had in my schooling years come across Macbeth. Thanks for the flashback. Excellent comment, by the way. Yeah, of course, I remember the term Thane, the Thane of Cawdor from Macbeth as well, having studied that play a few times. I suspected they were probably related, but this helps us understand a little bit better that relation. There is actually a longer note on Thanes within the Reader's Companion as well that I didn't discuss in the MATHOMS episode. I won't really go into that here, but it does give a little more insight into that in Hammond and Skull's Reader's Companion, which of course you should own a copy. All should own a copy. All right. And then from Anerthil again, if there were only 12 sheriffs, does that mean there were only 12 pubs? Maybe. I gotta say I'm not entirely. I feel like I'm missing the joke, kind of going over my head. So maybe you can drop another comment and help me understand what I'm missing here. I know I'm gonna feel dumb when I realize it. So, Anerthil, thanks for the comment. And then from Messianic Jiu-Jitsu, much love, Tolkien Road podcast. And all I can do is say high five and much love right back at you. All right. And let's hit our some comments from Patreon, from our fellowship over on Patreon. Harrison C says, on Tolkien's trope and citations from the Red Book of Westmarch, I think there's a lot we can appreciate from it. It lends an air of credibility to the narrative, since this is generally how we have received history of ages long gone, through accounts derived from often secondary sources, not primary sources. I think you could argue that Tolkien intentionally did not want to narrate from the standpoint of an all-knowing perspective in order to achieve this effect of rendering the history of Middle-earth more believable. This way of recounting history also allows for interesting questions about historiography. Why did the narrator choose to relate the tale in this way? What biases did they bring into the tale? And most intriguingly, what did they leave out, and what hidden tales do we still not know about, because those who experienced them have since died or left for the undying lands? There remains a great deal of the unknown in the history of Middle-earth that our minds are left to explore and ponder upon because of this form of storytelling. Yeah, great comment. I mean, truly epic comment. I agree with all of this. I think it does make for that it increases that sort of sense of verisimilitude when, because Tolkien did it this way, because, he kind of insists that these are, that he's sort of bringing to us certain records that, he's found from the past. And Harrison goes on to say, thanks for the note on the king. It seems remarkable that the hobbits still held on to the notion of the High King despite it not being a material reality. It speaks of a non-materialist view of reality, a spiritual view, if you will, and it lends greater significance to the return of the king at the end. The king has come again. The crownless shall be king. Thus is order and goodness restored in the land. What you said about hobbits wanting to be left alone makes the above even more amazing. They were an insular people, and still they recognized the authority of the king. Perhaps out of necessity, but there is also no sign they had been cruelly subjected. So they were willing subjects who also sent help to the king in the last battle against the Witch King of Angmar, and they even appointed a thane to act as an authority in the absence of a king. Yeah, and it's a good point, right? Like in our day and age, we're typically, very suspicious of all, forms of power and authority. So it's kind of surprising to us that, there might be a group of people, and historically this might be true, right? Where, it wasn't all just by conquer and conquest, right? There were cases where, people were like, hey, it might be in our interest as a people to, inherit the, to kind of be in the service of this greater king, right? This greater ruler, because they can provide us protection in exchange for us, doing certain things, providing certain things to them. It doesn't have to be, an ugly, thing. It can be a very positive, sort of symbiotic relationship, I guess you could say. And then finally from Seb M, he says, I love Tolkien's work, but this is one of the strangest bits. Only because he was an addict, he romanticized use of a drug causing cancer, among many other diseases. One of the weird things in the Legendarium, wonder if he was a meth user, we would be reading about magic crystals, not talking about Silmarils. Well, that's quite a comment, Seb. So, I get where you're coming from. I think that in Tolkien's day, they probably didn't have, any kind of idea about, or at least, most people did not have any sort of strong notion as we would today, that, that smoking, would, can cause cancer, was, often cause cancer. And this is coming from somebody who, had, my father was a smoking addict for a good portion of his life. Both of his parents smoked most of their lives, and I believe they died of different forms of cancer that probably had something to do with their smoking. I think we need to give Tolkien a little more kind of positive credit here. He's bringing something to the table that, it can be argued not all forms of maybe smoking in the past had like this kind of the kind of negative connotations they tend to have in our day and age. And also they maybe weren't as bad on a health front. Now, I am no medical professional, so don't take my word for any of this. But I think at the end of the day, like it was a hobby Tolkien rather enjoyed. I don't know that I would refer to him as an addict when it comes to smoking. Maybe he was, but I've never really even seen that question addressed. I think he just enjoyed a good pipe, and he knew that was a favorite hobby of people's in the past, so he included that here. So I appreciate, I guess, your concern there, Seb, and I completely understand where you're coming from, but I think we can just enjoy this portion of the story for what it is, and not let ourselves be too affected by the sort of knowledge we now have about I think what is really a very particular form of smoking, right? Which is the the kind of chain smoking cigarette style that often happens. So anyway, not a medical professional, so don't take my word for any of that, for any form of advice or anything like that on this. But I think we can just enjoy what Tolkien had to say about pipeweed, in the context of this particular story, and just leave it at that. All right. And then finally, let's look at, go back to our comments for, I'm having a lot of trouble getting these comments to pull up. All right, here we go. Let's see. Oh, yep, we already did that one. So we're going to do the comments for part 3 of the prologue here. Pull these over. And we have from James Moore Sr., well done, John. Thank you, James. Appreciate it. And then from Zephyr Optional, Bilbo is not the most reliable source. Just like you say, when understanding the Legendarium, you have to study the source of the translation and its context to get a clearer understanding of the reality behind the written text we read. This is such a unique and sophisticated way to write. Even some of the elf lore gets political when it changes from the Sindarin to the Noldoran perspectives. When asked to clarify some things Treebeard says about orcs and trolls coming from Ents and elves, Tolkien replies, though he has a great memory and some earthy wisdom, he is not one of the wise, and there is quite a lot he does not know or understand. So, yeah, a good comment. I think that's a good point. Generally speaking, Tolkien again was not writing from a completely third person omniscient perspective. Kind of saying like I know everything as it is. He writes in a much more complex style than that, and I think the story benefits because of that. I think we find different comments about this all throughout the story. Just like even in considering as we've been going through the Shadow of the Past, the kind of process of how Gandalf came to know these things is a very interesting question. So, good points, Ziffer Optional. Appreciate you, and thanks for the comment. All right. Well, I wouldn't have been able to live with myself if we'd gone too far down the road without considering Tolkien's forewords and the super informative prologue. So having accomplished that mission, it's eyes forward, no pun intended, as we fail to make haste on our most epic multi-year journey through the greatest book ever. All right. To close, as always, we'd like to thank our amazing fellowship. We know all of you have as well as we should like, and we've thanked less than half of you half as well as we deserve. Special thanks to the following: John R., Kaitlyn of Tea with Tolkien, KG, EarendilHope, Emilio P, Jonathan D, Richard K, Paul D, Julia, Werty, Chris B, 2R91, Carolyn S, Emiel K, Brian O II, Jonathan R, Matthew W, Daniel D, Harrison C, Jason C, Seb M, Willbo Baggins, Ms. Anonymous, Andrew T, Redhawk, Shannon S, Brian O I, Zeke F, James L, Chris L, Asya V, Ish of the Hammer, Teresa C, David of Pints with Jack, and Eric B. Finally, thanks to all for watching and or listening. Until next time, the road goes ever on. Bye-bye.